Thank you for the introduction. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Clyburn Cunningham IV, and I'm a computer scientist at NIST. And to my left is Julie Haney, also a computer scientist at NIST and the lead of our human-centered cybersecurity program. And today we're excited to present our research towards bridging the research-practice gap, understanding researcher-practitioner interactions and challenges in human-centered cybersecurity. Before we start, I want to highlight that Julie and I had great help from our colleague Susanne Furman, who could not be here after recently being promoted to a really cool position called retirement. So there's a ton of great research out there about human-centered cybersecurity, also known as usable security, yet a lot of this research never finds its way to practitioners, and if it does, it may never be incorporated into practice. This disconnect, known as the research-practice gap, has been observed in many disciplines and is often attributed to differing incentives, values, and work routines across the research and practice communities. This gap can have negative impacts on both of these communities. Practitioners may not benefit from research insights that can help improve their own and others' experiences of cybersecurity, and researchers may not benefit from practitioner insights that can inform the development of research that is meaningful and actionable in practice. We wanted to explore how to bridge the gap in HCC, but first, we needed to understand the current landscape of HCC researcher-practitioner relations. To that end, we posed the following research questions. What are HCC researchers' perceptions and experiences engaging with and considering practitioners and practitioner resources throughout the research lifecycle? How do HCC researchers share research evidence with practitioners? What are barriers to practitioner engagement, if any? And how do HCC researcher experiences differ, if at all, based on researcher demographics? For time's sake, we'll just focus on the first three today. For research question one, it was particularly important for us to examine barriers to practitioner engagement at different points in the research lifecycle, as research practice gap research has typically focused on activities at the culmination of research efforts, seldom addressing challenges and potential benefits of practitioner engagement from the beginning to the end of the research lifecycle. So 133 HCC researchers completed our survey. The majority of participants were from academic institutions, while smaller percentages were from industry and government. Most of these institutions were also in North America or Europe. Interestingly, more than 90% thought that some kind of security or IT practitioner could make use of their research. From a high level, we asked participants if and how they consult practitioners and practitioner resources throughout the research lifecycle, and in what ways they distribute HCC information to them. We included the consultation of practitioner resources here as a proxy for practice to provide insight into what's going on in the cybersecurity field. We were intentional about looking across the whole research lifecycle in order to explore where the perspectives of practitioners might influence research decisions or provide added value. So we asked our research survey participants how often they engage practitioners and practitioner resources during each of these research activities, how important they thought that it was, and the level of challenge that they encountered in doing so. Going into the findings for each activity is time prohibitive, so I'll just highlight a few of the key findings. So participants reported how frequently they consulted practitioners during each of the research activities on a 5-point scale that ranged from never to always. They most frequently engaged with practitioners and practitioner resources when developing recommendations and identifying research topics. They least frequently engaged with them when developing recruitment plans, analyzing data, and deciding on research methodology. Participants also rated the importance of engaging practitioners during each research activity. Importance was rated highest at the beginning and the end of the life cycle, so 86% thought that it was moderately or extremely important when targeting outputs to practitioners, and 70% thought it was important when identifying a new research topic. Lowest ratings of importance were reported when deciding which research methodology to use and conducting data analysis. Analyzing data, conducting literature reviews, and deciding on research methodology were seen as the least challenging, with only roughly a quarter reporting that the challenge during these activities was moderate or extreme, and over half of participants reported high levels of challenge when recruiting practitioners as research participants and when targeting outputs for practitioners. We also wanted to know what barriers researchers face when engaging practitioners. So we divided these into pre-dissemination barriers and then barriers encountered when disseminating research output to practitioners. These are the pre-dissemination barriers selected by at least 30% of participants. To touch on a few of them, 2/3 of participants had the perception that practitioners don't have time to engage in research activities. Almost half of the participants said that organizational gatekeeping was an issue. So this is when organizations don't allow employees to participate in research, often because they don't want to expose sensitive cybersecurity information. 43% had the perception that practitioners don't see the value in participating in research efforts, and then 42% were not sure how to best reach practitioners who might be interested in their research. And these are the barriers to disseminating research outputs to practitioners selected by at least 30% of participants. So just over 40% had the perception of a lack of practitioner interest or uptake. Just under 40% said they had little funding or resources to take the time to produce output for practitioners. That same percentage were not sure where to best disseminate these outputs. About 1/3 said there was little to no incentive within their institutions to develop outputs for practitioners, and then 30% were not sure how to convert a research style into formats and recommendations more appropriate for practitioners. So we had previously conducted a survey of practitioners about their views and use of HCC, and we did a comparison between the channels through which practitioners prefer to receive HCC information and then how researchers disseminate their outputs to practitioners. So the blue bars on the screen are researcher channels and the gray ones are practitioner preferences. You'll notice that there are a few channels for which practitioner and practitioner responses were fairly close. For example, for which researcher and practitioner responses were fairly close. So presentations at practitioner events and articles in practitioner publications were pretty close to each other, but most were quite different. For example, practitioners prefer to receive HCC information via online forums, podcasts, knowledge repositories, and mailing lists. So they want to see information incorporated into authoritative publications like standards documents and government publications, but researchers aren't utilizing those channels as much. And now I'll turn it over to Julie to talk about recommendations based on the results.
Okay. Thanks, Clyburn.
Yep.
All right, so I'll start with some suggestions for researchers. First, consider where additional practitioner engagement may be beneficial throughout the entire research lifecycle, not just at the beginning and the end. So for example, when performing data analysis, having that practitioner perspective can help lend some operational context to the data. Second, referring back to the bar chart that Clyburn just showed, share outputs with practitioners using the channels that are most preferred by them. And then focus on synthesizing and reporting a body of work rather than just a single study. So practitioners may have more interest or more confidence in a synthesis of multiple studies that validate and complement each other. And then some suggestions for intermediaries. So these are third parties, because we really don't want to put undue influence or undue burden on researchers who are already quite busy. So first, create space for research within practitioner forums and publications. So for example, dedicated tracks for research at conferences. Second, consider the establishment of evidence bridges. So these are individuals or organizations that act as intermediaries between the research and practice communities. They synthesize research into a format that's more consumable by practitioners, and they also serve as a channel for practitioners to communicate their needs to researchers. So these evidence bridges are actually very common in the medical field throughout the world. So for example, in the US, the American Medical Association synthesizes medical research into a more condensed format that can be more easily read by medical providers. And then finally, provide venues for researchers and practitioners to have meaningful two-way communications, interactions, discussions, and to make connections. All right, so just to summarize some takeaways, our participants often saw the importance of engaging practitioners, but that didn't always translate into them doing it. That's likely because of the high levels of challenge that they experienced. The barriers were often related to a lack of connections and understanding of practitioners, although a significant amount did cite some institutional barriers, such as the lack of resources and incentives. There seems to be a disconnect between the channels that participants use to communicate their research to practitioners and what practitioners prefer. And there are opportunities to increase practitioner involvement and connections throughout the entire research life cycle. And finally, intermediaries could help bridge the gap between research and practice and alleviate burdens on both communities. So to close, so we actually want to do something about some of the things that we found, specifically about providing forums for researchers and practitioners to engage and connect and discuss. So we have just stood up, just within the last week, a new human-centered cybersecurity community of interest. We invite you to join. We're going to be sending out announcements in a few weeks to our cybersecurity mailing list that have thousands of practitioners on them. So we really envision this as an online forum where researchers and practitioners can share information, ask questions, where researchers can recruit practitioners for their studies as well. So please do join. And with that, I'd like to thank you all for your attention and also thank any of you in the room who took the survey last summer. We appreciate it.